One day a treasure map appeared. It said that the martial arts of Cheongija, the greatest martial artist in the history of the Murim, were hidden inside Hengshan, along with the secret weapon he had left behind. This would be the spark that would set the Murim ablaze, which had been very quiet. Suddenly, one of the mountains split in half, and a boy came out, saying that he had finally escaped that cave. The sky was blue, just like before, at least. He thought that maybe it was the shock of leaving the place, but no matter how much he tried, he could not remember his life before entering there. Even so, he needed to remember in order to obtain his revenge. His first memory was from when he was 10 years old. An old man introduced himself as Cheongija, saying that they might not understand or believe it, but that in 10 years they would have to save the world. 100 children were gathered by Cheongija, and the boy was one of them. He still remembered the calm eyes of that old man, who ordered them to obey everything he said. He also explained that the next day they would begin martial arts training. The boy did not feel fear because he was an orphan and had nothing to lose. Cheongija warned that for those who tried to escape, he had sealed the entrance of the cave with a rocky cliff, and that it would also be very bad if someone tried to enter. Everything, from eating to sleeping, was controlled by him. They could not do anything on their own. The first martial art they learned was how to breathe. The art of the three energies, a technique that absorbed the energy of the heavens, the earth, and man. After that came how to use a sword, the sword of the three energies. Then how to move the body with the step of the three energies. In other words, everything had to be learned under the instruction of Cheongija. Even how to walk. Perhaps 3 years had passed when he called them again and explained that those martial arts could reach the realm of the martial gods. For the next 7 years, each of them would master these arts so that all of them could open that door and enter there. To prevent the calamity that would threaten this world, they had to train without hesitation. Then they entered that cave and were sealed inside. The boy knew the reason why they had to survive in that hellish place. Everything was because of Cheongija. As he had ordered, they trained tirelessly inside the cave. The mist that filled the place was actually condensed energy. Because of that, the arts improved day after day, but the energy became so dense that even space itself began to give way, and strange portals started to open. Demonic creatures invaded the cave. On that day, they saw the gate to hell. They fought against it, but it was a nightmare, a brutal fight for survival. The martial arts of the three energies were truly useful, but even so, no one besides that boy managed to survive. That was why he was the chosen one. He remembered his name. It was Dan Haeunwoo. Later, at the Cloud Pavilion, Dan entered a restaurant, and a woman from an important family paid attention to him. Her guard commented that he was carrying a sword without a sheath. Another man observed that the sword looked exceptional. Dan sat down to have a meal after a long time. He had no idea how much time had passed without a proper meal. He ate with such appetite that even the other customers ordered noodles as well. But that young lady wondered why that man caught her attention so much. When he finished the meal and the waiter came to charge him, Dan realized that he had forgotten about that thing called money. The waiter said that it was a problem, and that if he ate, he had to pay. Dan replied that he had nothing. The waiter then asked for the sword as payment, but Dan said he could not give it. It was the sword he had traded for the life of his last friend. The waiter asked if he had planned to eat for free from the beginning, and people were already getting up to collect the debt. Then that young lady approached with money, saying that she would pay. She got close to Dan, who asked why she had done that, thinking that he should say something in that situation. Seeing him up close, she was certain that his eyes were like those of a child seeing the world for the first time. Dan tried to say something, but simply left. She noticed it. People commented that he had not even said thank you. How strange. The young lady's brother said that he was a vagabond with no sense of gratitude. She noticed that his sword was incredible, a handcrafted sword, but walking around without a sheath could bring trouble, so she decided to follow him because he needed a sheath. On the streets, Dan remembered that he should have said thank you back then, but he only realized it now. Later, back at the Cloud Pavilion, the place was full of martial artists. That young woman from before was introduced as Jo Se-ho-hyun. She commented that the influence of the Murim alliance was incredible. Jo In-henan, the son of the clan leader, and her brother, agreed, saying he never imagined that the leader of the alliance himself would make a move. Sima Chul, the leader of the Jo escort agency, said that the alliance, the Orthodox faction, and the forest bandits were all heading to Hengshan, and that this was only part of the reason. The true reason so many people were following was probably the reputation of the leader. The greatest and most powerful martial artist in the Murim, Cheongija, possessed extraordinary knowledge, countless hidden weapon techniques, powerful martial arts, and the ability to read the flow of celestial energy. In his final years, Cheongija created a martial art called Shadow Lightning Blade and drove the world into madness. Using unique hidden weapon techniques, he passed his art to a mere beggar and turned him into an absolute martial master in just 3 years. That martial artist was eventually considered a public enemy and met a miserable death, but the incident only drew even more attention to Cheongija and his techniques. After that, many groups of the Murim went in search of him, but he disappeared without a trace. Sima Chul thought that the Jo clan leader had discovered the treasure map with Cheongija's martial art, and that it was natural for the entire Murim to covet it as well. He said that since he was accompanying the leader at the request of the Jo clan, nothing serious should happen, but even so they should remain cautious. Sometimes things that no one can predict happen in this world. It was was at that moment that Dan entered the restaurant and everything happened. Jo-in asked if she was really going after that strange beggar, saying he was against it and that the man had nothing to do with her, no manners and no decency, and that her kindness would be wasted. Sima Chaol agreed. Walking separately from the group at that moment was dangerous, and besides, the leader was also arriving. So-hyun replied that it was fine and that she would stay there. Meanwhile, Dan was a bit lost in that busy and crowded city, seeing various merchants and street performers. Everything was calm and peaceful. There were happy children, and mothers happy with their children. Then he remembered the past. He and his best friend had promised each other that they would leave that place alive. Aksegi had asked them to promise one thing. If they made it out, they would go to his house and tell his father. Dan said he would be the one to tell him. Aksegi agreed, but asked him not to die. But that day, Dan was careless. A creature almost killed him, but Aksegi stepped in front of the attack to be hit instead. Dan told him to get up, asking why he had done that when they had promised they would meet his father. Aksegi replied that among all of them, Dan was the strongest, and that he had to survive and tell his father that he was sorry. Dan, looking at the light of the full moon, thought that his freedom had been bought with the lives of 99 people. He owed all of them, and promised that he would make Gija pay. He wandered around and ended up returning to that same restaurant. That girl was still there, but he also noticed that at night, a huge procession of martial warriors had departed, and that same young lady was accompanying them. Dan then decided to follow them. The group stopped in the forest very late at night. Resting at the entrance of Hengshan, Dan realized that everyone was heading to the place he had come from. The group behind was also going there. They were all searching for something specific. There were also Jigel Jungchun, advisor of the Murim Alliance, talking with the alliance leader, Doko Woon. Doko said that the Unorthodox Alliance and the Green Forest Bandits were suddenly making a different move, and that he was worried because times like these were always dangerous. Jigel asked him not to worry so much, as they had heard that they were going for a completely different objective. Doko replied that then his instincts were getting a bit dull. Meanwhile, some warriors tried to approach Seo-hyun, especially Peng of the Flying Dragon, who asked if she was having difficulties and if she wanted to rest a bit. Her brother replied that everything was fine there, and asked them to leave them alone. Suddenly, a group of bandits really approached. They were the Green Forest Bandits, led by the blood-sucking demon, who said that they were very good at hiding, but that he had found them. The leader ordered everyone to prepare. The advisor asked for caution, as the Unorthodox Alliance had joined them as well. Doko knew that the blood-sucking demon was a martial master difficult to deal with. When the battle began, the blood-sucking demon destroyed the weaker warriors with kicks that broke necks, and with his massive blade. After finishing off the weak ones, he went straight for Doko Woon, and their blades clashed. The subordinates were killing each other, and clearly the Murim Alliance side was losing, being outnumbered. The blood-sucking demon asked if they were having difficulties, and said that the secret weapon left by Gija belonged to them. Dan, who had been hiding, asked himself if he had really heard the name Gija. He drove the tip of his sword beneath a rock and hurled it onto the battlefield. Then he shattered it with his slashes, used it as a distraction, and killed everyone beneath that rain of fragments. After joining the battle, he simply asked where Gija was. Doko was surprised that he had not sensed the boy's presence at all. The advisor thanked him for the help, but asked why he was looking for Gija there, since he had died 10 years ago. Dan asked if that was true, unable to believe he was dead, because he had still not avenged the deaths of his friends. At that moment, the energy of the void began pouring out of Dan's body, causing the warriors of the Murim Alliance to freeze in place, swallowed by that devastating sensation. Dan had endured a bitter amount of time and escaped that hell, but now the target of his revenge was already dead. After everything that had happened, after everyone had died, telling him to take revenge, the Alliance leader was not overwhelmed by the void energy, and realized he needed to stop it. Otherwise, the Murim Alliance members would suffer energy deviation. The young lady Seo-hyun, whom Dan recognized as the girl who had once shown him kindness, approached to speak with him. Dan realized that he too had only survived thanks to the kindness of his comrades from that hell. Since Gija was gone, he could no longer take revenge. Maybe he would have to find them somewhere else. Suddenly, the void energy disappeared. The warriors returned to normal, and even the Alliance leader was shocked. Doko knew it was something even experienced masters struggled to escape from. He wondered who that kid really was. Seo-hyun asked if Dan was searching for someone, and told her uncle that this person had helped them, asking if they could travel together to find whoever he was looking for. Sima became slightly nervous. It was hard to refuse the request of someone who had truly helped them, but the Murim Alliance warriors had been affected by the void energy, and he did not know whether the Alliance leader would allow it. Doko thought that boy was capable of killing Green Forest and Unorthodox Alliance bandits in an instant, making him dangerous. Considering the losses they had suffered, it was better to keep such a threat nearby. The Alliance leader eventually agreed. Sima then asked whether Dan would consider working for the escort agency, and the surrounding warriors were impressed, since working for that agency was an incredible opportunity. Dan said he was not sure. Jo-in commented that it was not just some random place where anyone could work. Dan replied that he would like to answer, but he did not even know what an escort agency was. Everyone looked confused. The old man then explained that an escort agency transported belongings and protected clients. One of the Flying Dragon warriors asked where that country bumpkin had come from. But Pang drew attention to Dan's sword and the killing intent overflowing from it, saying it was no ordinary weapon, and that it was being wasted in the hands of a hillbilly. Many eyes were now fixed on them, so they decided they would wait until the alliance leader entered Hengshan before taking the sword. When they finally arrived at Hengshan, with the sun still rising, everyone noticed something strange about the place. Dan himself wondered what they were searching for there, since he had just come from that place. The alliance leader asked whether they would finally see Gija's secret manual. The advisor replied that they had not even found the entrance to the cave yet. The warriors searched everywhere but could not find it. The advisor suggested cutting the mountain in half, but Doko said that might damage the secret manual. Dan thought that the place he had come from had already collapsed, because he himself had split it in half, so they would have to find the entrance Gija had originally used, the place where he could still sense Gija's energy. Then he moved ahead of all the warriors and easily found the entrance. Doko asked how he knew where it was, and Dan replied that he used to live inside there. Pang said he could imagine that, calling him a mountain savage, and saying it was no surprise he carried a sword without a sheath. Doko said the search would be conducted by himself, the advisor, and the leader of the Flying Dragon Corps, while the others secured the perimeter. He told Dan that he owed him a debt and thanked him, but Dan replied that there was nothing inside except memories of death. Doko thought the boy had become unsettled, and asked him not to get involved any further, since they could handle things from there. Then he advanced into the cave alongside the advisor. Dan thought that Gija really was dead, and that he no longer cared about whatever they would find inside. Seohyun approached him and asked if he had really lived there, but then the Flying Dragon group appeared around her, deliberately blocking Dan's path. The big one said there was no guarantee that he was not a spy for the bandits. She replied that of course he was not. Pang asked how she could guarantee that, saying she was too kind. Another warrior said that if he was innocent, they would first confiscate the sword. Looking closely, the sword seemed old and worn at first glance, but its energy was extraordinary. They ordered Dan to hand over the sword. Dan replied that the sword was something entrusted to him by his dead friend, and that he would not give it up even if he died, doubting very much that they would step over his corpse to take it. The two Flying Dragon warriors then rushed at him. Dan easily noticed their strategy. They planned to attack together, flanking him. In that case, he would dodge and cut both of them down, and that was exactly what they did. He analyzed their movements perfectly. Before Dan could cut them in half, the alliance leader ordered them to stop and told them to stand guard. People began wondering if they had really found Gija's secret weapon. Doko ordered everyone to step back, saying it was over. Pang told the country bumpkin to consider himself lucky. Sehon looked worried, and Dan also did not understand what she meant by saying things were fine. She said she had been worried and realized they had not introduced themselves yet. After they introduced themselves, she got closer to him and said they needed to get ready to leave. And so the Murim Alliance expedition to find Gija's secret weapon came to an end, for now. Back in Hubei province, rumors were already spreading that the Murim Alliance had found Gija's secret weapon and would dominate the world with it. Everyone was talking about it, but at the main headquarters of the Murim Alliance, the leader Dokgo said that it was ridiculous and that no one would ever believe them even if they said Gija's secret weapon did not exist. He was in a council meeting with the elders of the alliance, and even though they had not found any secret weapon, the rumors had already spread. All they found in the cave in Hengshan was a wooden box that seemed to have been left by Gija, with a letter. The letter described that the blood demon would be a figure who would shake that era, seeking to throw the entire Jianghu into chaos. To prevent this, Gija had formed 100 unparalleled martial masters and begged that they be used to kill the blood demon. To control such warriors, the yin-yang parasite inside the box was absolutely necessary. Gija claimed that with it, the blood demon would never escape. When Doko opened the box, there was indeed an orb containing the yin-yang parasite, but the most shocking thing was that there was no trace at all of the 100 martial artists mentioned in the letter. One of the elders asked if it was all just madness from Gija. Doko replied that on the contrary, it seemed that there was some force working behind all of this. There were also reasons to doubt. In Hengshan, the true objective of the forest bandits did not seem to be Gija's secret weapon, but rather to harm the Murim Alliance. They never searched for the weapon. Doko admitted that in Hengshan they had not found a single trace of it, and the fact that a large number of bodies had disappeared was proof. The rumors in the markets kept spreading like a snowball rolling down a mountain, in a clear attempt to draw all of Jianghu's attention to the Murim Alliance. The elders asked who would do something like that. One of them said they should suspect the head of the Zhou clan, since he was the one who brought the map. Doko replied that he did not trust that man, but that there could be a spy inside the Zhou clan. Given the seriousness of the situation, they needed to send someone capable to keep watch over the Zhou clan, because even if the clan was not behind everything, it could be being used by traitors. Then, back at the Zhou clan estate, the head of the escort agency returned with the young master and the young lady, accompanied by Dan. Dan thought that house was enormous. Sima said he would meet with the leader and asked someone to take Dan to the agency. Seohyun had wanted to buy him a sheath on the way. Dan thought that people in that world were obsessed with sheaths, and that it made no sense. Seohyun said that the sheath he was using was already completely patched up, and that no matter how good a sheath was, it could not withstand the the energy of the sword. In fact, the sheath he had at that moment broke apart completely. Dan said he did not need a sheath and that it was fine. Seo Hyun apologized to him for saying she would make him a sheath and not following through. Dan wondered why she was apologizing, remembering that it was the same thing his friend had done when he was dying. He then told her to never apologize again, that he did not want to hear those words anymore. She was shocked. Sima called for Dan to come quickly, and Seo Hyun stayed behind, wondering if she had said something wrong. At the Renan escort agency, Dan noticed that there were many porters around, doing manual labor and carrying luggage. Sima walked past several people giving orders and told Jongchil that he had brought a new porter and that he should take care of him and train him. Jongchil replied that he would be strict with him. Sima thought that the guy was a bit rough and told Dan to learn properly and good luck. Jongchil, with a big grin, said that even though he was a newcomer brought by the agency chief, he would not treat him any differently and that he would receive the same lessons as any other rookie. He asked his name and Dan introduced himself in a blunt way. Jongchil asked why he was speaking so coldly, and Dan replied that his arms and legs were very short. Jongchil asked if he was trying to pick a fight and if he wanted to die on his first day. Dan felt intense hostility from him and wondered if he should just kill him already. Placing his hand on the hilt of his sword, Jongchil asked since when porters walked around with swords and ordered him to hand it over. Dan said no. With that tension and Dan's killing intent, poor Jongchil backed down and said they would stop there for today, that it was too late and that training would start tomorrow. Dan thought that a strange number of people were coveting his sword. The other porters celebrated that Jongchil had backed down to the newcomer, and everyone went to rest and sleep. Jongchil, however, kept thinking about how he would make Dan pay for that humiliation if it were not for the sword. In the middle of the night, while everyone was asleep, Jongchil got up to look for the newcomer and thought he must be sleeping somewhere nearby, but he came across Dan himself and asked if he was not sleeping. He then noticed that Dan had his eyes closed, sleeping while standing. Jongchil tried to take the sword, but Dan opened his eyes and instinctively the poor porter froze. It was only for an instant, but Jongchil saw his own death and felt overwhelming fear, like prey before a predator. He begged for forgiveness desperately. Dan closed his eyes again because he was simply circulating his internal energy to protect himself. That habit of sleeping while standing had started during the long period he spent in the cave, living in constant alert. Even while resting, eating or sleeping, he never lowered his guard. The next morning, Dan woke Jongchil, who ran away from him in fear. The other porters got up early to start working, but they were impressed by Dan's abilities. He moved several boxes with his feet and hands, using the movement of the wind itself. He was extremely strong and agile, stacking all the boxes as if they were nothing. The porters told him to be careful, but he went on moving all the boxes again like that, taking all the work for himself. The young lady heard about it from one of the porters, and during their break she remembered what Dan had said to her the day before. Maybe she had said something that upset him, and that was why she wanted to apologize, but without actually apologizing. She also found it strange. She was so curious about the meaning of those words that she could barely sleep, so when he passed by she blushed. Dan said that he had started working as a porter. She asked if he liked the job, but that was not what she had wanted to ask, and she lost her courage. Dan replied that he liked peace, and that what he disliked was when that peace was broken. He also said that hearing a friend apologize was very unpleasant. Seohyun thought that meant he saw her as a friend, and replied that it was fine, she would never say that again. Then Pang appeared, saying what a coincidence, and commented that Miss Jo had become even more beautiful than the last time he saw her. She asked what he was doing there, since he should be busy with Murim matters. He replied that he had received another mission, and that they had decided to provide maximum support to the escort agency. Contrary to Dan's desire for peace and harmony, the Murim world was on the brink of a bloody whirlpool. Meanwhile, the Lord of the Celestial Watch was receiving news that 30 members had been annihilated. One of the survivors begged for forgiveness, saying they could not find who had done it. The leader asked if the Celestial Watch force was strong enough to defeat the entire Black Tortoise unit of the Murim Alliance, and even so, it had been annihilated. Then, with his power, he made all the bodies levitate and drew the blood out of them, saying that they had all been defeated by a single person. It must have been Gija. It must have been one of the monsters he had created, but he did not know if it was enough to defeat the blood demon. He was eager to find out. He ordered his subordinate to investigate everyone who had traveled with the Murim Alliance at Hengshan, saying that he would find the one responsible for destroying his Celestial Watch force. Meanwhile, Seohyun was staring at the Flying Dragon group. Pang thought that woman was always breathtaking, but wondered why she was with that bumpkin, saying a porter carrying a sword was ridiculous. Seohyun thought the Flying Dragon Corporation had come as a representative of the Alliance, and if they caused trouble, Dan might end up suffering there. So she told him not to mind what Pang had said. Pang asked what kind of closeness there was between them. Miryung, Pang's sister, wondered if the reason he had come running the moment the leader gave the order was because of her, calling him a show-off. But another person approached, asking if he was Dan, and said it was good that Miss Jo was there as well. He introduced himself as Helm Pyo, an escort warrior from the agency, who had come under the leader's orders to train the new porter. Sohyun said he had just started working, and was already going on an escort mission. Pang said that was their job, and thought it was a great opportunity to get closer to Sohyun. Dan asked asked what an escort mission was, saying he did not know, but he also could not give up his sword. Pyo told him not to worry, and that he just needed to follow him for now. The Flying Dragon group was already hoping the poor guy would get fired. Miryung thought men, for heaven's sake, even the vice leader of the corporation could be childish when it came to women. But she noticed that this Dan did not even react when he was being provoked. Sohan asked if he was really leaving already. Miryung thought maybe that guy was nothing special, since he had given in to the provocation, but Dan said he would follow Pyo because he could not be fired. Pyo remembered receiving instructions from Sima, who said Jongchil would teach Dan how to work as a porter, but that he had to make sure Dan did not cause trouble during the escort mission. Pyo also knew there was a need to make Dan give up before he got closer to Seohyun, but he wondered why he needed to help with that. Sima said he would understand when he met Dan. Pyo thought he could ignore the way he spoke, since they said he had lived in the mountains, but a porter carrying a sword without a sheath was truly strange. He asked if Dan practiced swordsmanship. Dan replied that he did. The art of the three energies. Pyo thought he was a dreamer who wanted to be a warrior, and said the three energies sword was the foundation of many martial arts. But there were others that worked much better. Then he drew his sword to demonstrate his skills and told Dan to show what he knew first. With the three energies sword, Dan asked if that was a fight and if Pyo would try to kill him. Pyo said no, it was just a duel to measure each other's abilities. Dan replied that he was much stronger than him and did not need a duel to measure that. Pyo asked how he could say that, since he had trained his whole life and Dan was just a practitioner. Even so, he said he liked his confidence and would show how he could become stronger. Then Dan raised his arm, measuring something, and told his opponent it was the first time he would not kill someone with his sword, so he needed to calculate very carefully how to do it. After that he approached, measured where he should strike around Pyo, and said it was fine, now he could avoid killing him. Pyo thought so, that was what the leader had meant, because that guy was truly strange. When Pyo advanced, before he even struck, Dan had already recognized the movement he would make and predicted everything, so he dodged before it even happened, and brought down a strike from the heavens, like thunder. Pyo was grazed, thinking that had not been the three energies sword. When he woke up a few seconds later, Dan asked if it had hurt a lot, sir. Pyo asked what kind of martial art had been used. Dan replied that it was the three energies sword, and that technique was the heavenly thunder. Pyo said it did not look anything like the three energies, and could not understand what heavenly thunder meant. He did not expect that guy to be a martial master, and not even the agency leader must have known that. Dan said Pyo's skills were better, right? Pyo thought that was ridiculous, because he was so naive despite being so skilled. He decided to report it to the agency leader, but first he needed to teach Dan the rules of society. He extended his hand, but Dan did nothing. Pyo explained that when someone extended their hand like that, it was to help the other person get up. Then Dan helped him up. So Dan ended up staying at Pyo's house, being hosted there, learning the basic rules of society. Pyo found it very strange when he saw Dan sleeping while standing. It was Pyo who taught Dan the skills he had lost after being trapped in that cave for several years: how to write, how to read, where to take off his clothes and where not to. As a result, Dan became a porter under Pyo, and little by little began to open his heart. But Miryung was watching Dan very closely, because the Flying Dragon had been sent specifically to monitor the Zhou clan. However, she realized that her real task was actually to keep an eye on that kid. Even so, there was nothing suspicious about him. He was just a weird show-off. But she noticed that Sohyun kept staring at Dan. She had peculiar tastes. After some time, Dan truly became a real member of the Renan escort agency. And finally, the day of the extremely important mission arrived. Sima told Mata that it was a very important mission, and to return safely. Mata, one of the veteran warriors of the escort agency, said not to worry, and that in the name of the agency, they would return safely. He went ahead as the vanguard. The carriages followed, accompanied by porters and other warriors, and only then did Dan's life in a civilized society truly begin. But a few days before they left for that mission, in the office of the Zhou clan leader, Zhou Il-hyun was receiving the people from the Flying Dragon Corporation. Pang introduced himself, and the leader recognized him as the Sword Dragon. The others introduced themselves, and he was quite pleased. Zhou Il-hyun thought that woman was very polite and beautiful, and that she was perfect for his son. He said that while they stayed in his house, he hoped they could teach his children through an exchange of martial arts, since he knew that when young men and women interacted daily, they naturally grew closer. It was a good opportunity for his son. Miryung, however, had her eyes on something else. She told her brother they had that mission to complete, and asked why he spent so much time watching the young lady, even while she trained. She herself had been observing for days, but Siyun had not even looked at Pang, and kept looking at that other random worker. Pang said there was no need to worry about him, and that they had requested an audience with the clan leader himself. It was obvious they were more important. Meanwhile, the escort agency members were having their last meal before leaving for the mission. Dan thought cooked food was amazing, delicious, since he had only eaten raw monsters. Pyo said he had never seen anyone eat like him, as if he were performing a ritual. Even so, he told him to eat well, because the mission mission would be very difficult, and the destination was Sichuan, homeland of the Tang clan. This time, the request had come from one of the greatest clans in Jianghu. At that moment, the clients were passing by. Tang Hogwan, an elder of the Tang clan of Sichuan, and Tang Chelgi. Pio explained that not only that, but regardless of the escort warriors from the agency, the Tang clan itself had come with their own guards, which made it hard to guess how valuable the cargo they were transporting was. Dan kept his eyes on the old man. Hogwan said he could smell something very pleasant, that it was quite annoying, and then he exploded a butterfly using only his internal energy. He explained that among those hunters, there was someone emitting a very unusual energy, and he had clearly noticed it was Dan. But at that moment, the main guard Mayuki said the preparations for departure were ready, and that they could rest assured. Hogwan thought he must have sensed Mayuki's energy, and said they could leave soon, since the journey would be long. Even so, the elder remained suspicious, because he did not know that Mayuki's energy was that great. Mayuki told the escort warriors and porters to finish eating and listen. The symbol of the Renin escort agency was speed. Normally, the road to Sichuan would take 4 months, but they had to arrive within a month and a half. Everyone got a bit nervous and answered yes sir. Pyo warned Dan that if he got on the bad side of the escort leader Mayuki, he would be fired immediately, so he should not fall behind. Then everyone started getting up in a hurry, because Mayuki was already preparing to depart. Dan wondered what falling behind meant. Later, the horses were running, the porters were running, the warriors were running. Mayuki's missions were infamous because of his strict personality, but the real problem was that it was not only the escort warriors trained in martial arts who needed to keep up the pace, but also the porters, who had to run without that same physical preparation. Dan, on the other hand, was completely relaxed, as if it were just a walk. When it was time to sleep, Mayuki asked if the boy was not going to sleep. Pyo replied that he slept like that sir, standing up. And so, Dan and the escort group arrived at Pingding Mountain on a journey that would take 4 days, but they stopped when they were ambushed. A spear was fired, but Mayuki split it in half with his sword. It was a group of bandits. Hogwan said they were just Green Forest bandits and told everyone not to panic. They could keep observing for now. The disciple Chelji replied yes sir. Pyo said they would retreat if they paid the toll and told Dan not to worry. Dan wondered if they were the same bandits as before. Mayuki threw chains with coins which were the toll, and ordered them to clear the way, but the fat bald man cut the cords, saying he did not want small change and that he wanted the goods. Then he leaped toward Mayuki, attacking violently. That bandit was not there for cargo. He was there to kill. Mayuki managed to block the first strike, but the kick to his chest made him cough blood. The fat bald man asked if that escort agency really thought they could stop them, and ordered everyone to be killed. Several bandits rushed toward the porters. Zhengqil panicked, just like the others. Hogwan asked who was backing those bandits, because they were not mere Green Forest bandits. The bald man said they were the heroes of the Green Forest bandits, and that it was an honor for them to die by their hands. Hogwan replied that it was a shame, because if they were just bandits, they could have lived. Then he fired a poisoned needle that pierced the first bandit's chest, exploding him into blood, and followed with a rain of those needles that pierced several bandits along the way. The people behind it all finally appeared. The ones who had hired the forest bandits were from the Phantom Hall. The first one said that since Tang Hogwan of the Tang clan had personally interfered, they would not waste time standing there. That was an order from the Phantom Hall, and no one would leave alive. Hogwan told everyone to prepare, saying those guys were serious opponents. Even if everyone from the escort agency fell, they had to deliver those items to the main clan. He told the guards, the elite of the elite, that no matter what happened, they had to protect the escorted item. The Phantom Hall assassins were ruthless and killed several porters and warriors in an instant, but Dan stood in the middle of the battlefield just watching. Mayuk thought his escort warriors were no match for those assassins, who were true masters. Even if the Tang clan had the advantage over them, they had no intention of drawing their swords for their sake. But when Dan found himself facing the person who had helped him all along, he finally drew his sword and with a lightning strike, pulverized that assassin. The others wondered what that explosion had been. Pyo told Dan to hurry and help the others as well. Dan asked why and said he had only helped because that one was his friend. Pyo said they were all part of the escort mission and asked him to please help the others too. Ma Yuk was gravely injured. Zhengqil had already been subdued by the assassins, and Dan did not quite understand what Pyo meant, but since he was asking, fine, he would help. Dan advanced against the assassins while the escort agency members were truly struggling. Only Hogwan could vaguely sense Dan's movements. The assassins could not. In just a few seconds, with only a few steps, Dan passed through all the Phantom Hall assassins and reduced them to ashes with his lightning. The leader of the Phantom Hall, Wu Mun-hee, wondered if the hall had really been annihilated, since she had thought it would be enough to deal with a simple escort agency. One of her subordinates apologized, saying it seemed there was a very powerful martial martial artists there that their intelligence had not detected. She replied that she would handle it herself and would find out who that powerful master was. The Woman clan, even if it was not considered one of the 5 great clans, was not inferior to them. It controlled a third of the trade and spread its influence with immense financial power. Information from the Tang clan had secretly leaked to the Woman clan. At that moment, the leader Woman Wang was being informed that the Tang had succeeded in producing the thunder bombs together with the Hua clan, and that they were transporting the equivalent of 5 carriages. Wang asked if they were saying they had uncovered the method of making thunder bombs that had disappeared hundreds of years ago, along with the Thunder sect. The subordinate reported that the Hua clan was descended from the Thunder sect and had managed to bring that method back to the world. Huang said that based on the reports about those bombs, they could blow up some ordinary sects without even making noise. They needed those bombs and the method to produce them. The messenger said that in fact, the young lady had found out everything and left together with the Phantom Hall. Huang asked how, what Hai had done and where she had gone. The messenger replied that she had headed toward Pingding Mountain. Hai was quite excited, moving toward that interesting man. Meanwhile, the escort group was burying the dead. Thanks to Dan's help, the escort agency had wiped out the enemies, but had also lost almost all of its warriors. Mayuk was alive, but gravely injured. The rest of the porters were terrified. Shulji said that in that condition the escort mission would have difficulty continuing, and that they should go back. Hogwan replied no, they would deliver it to the end. Shulji asked what he meant, if he intended to continue with that agency in that condition, saying it would be better to look for another one. Then he said they had the heavenly thunder, and Hogwan asked what he meant. Hogwan even congratulated Chelgi for having completed the secret art of Kentang, the heavenly thunder, saying he could have warned them at least. Chelgi replied that he had barely been able to see it, so of course Chelgi had not been able to either, but he said it had not been him who used the heavenly thunder, and that if he was not mistaken, it had been that kid over there. Then Hogwan approached and asked which sect Dan belonged to, and where he had learned all that. Dan thought that Cheolgi had never taught them martial arts, only thrown them into that hell. The martial arts he had were something he had earned after a long time fighting on that boundary between life and death. In other words, his martial arts were his alone. He had not learned them anywhere, so he told the elder that he had not learned from any sect. Hogwan asked how, if those abilities had simply fallen from the sky, and whether he was speaking rudely to him. Pio noticed what was happening, and stepped in to explain that his friend had lived for many years inside a cave in the mountains, so he was like that, and asked the elder to understand him this time. Hogwan thought that, well, he seemed a bit arrogant. Even so, for the sake of completing the mission, the fact that he was so strong was very good. That porter also seemed to listen to the escort warrior's words. Pio told Dan not to say that kind of thing anymore. Hogwan said Dan was far more skilled than he had thought, and that he would take the leader's place, becoming responsible for that mission. With someone who could use lightning leading the escort, no matter what happened, they would be protected. Pio asked if he would become the leader. Mayuki replied yes, that Dan was the only one left, and that he himself would run back to the agency to send additional manpower. Meanwhile, Dan would lead. Pio thought someone had to take responsibility, so he replied yes sir, that he still had a lot to learn, but would serve as the escort leader. Hogwan said they would not move that day anymore, and would depart the next day after resting. But Chelgi kept thinking that none of it made any sense. The novice porter was a supreme martial artist, who had mastered the heavenly thunder, so the Renan agency continued with Pio at the front leading. Meanwhile, Mayuki was returning to the Renan escort agency to report the attack as quickly as possible, but on the way he was intercepted and quickly killed by a weapon pulled from a chain. The Phantom Assassins, the assassination unit of the Blood Demon, had appeared. They had to annihilate everyone at the Zhou clan estate immediately. Meanwhile, the clan leader was with Sima, finishing several papers and documents. Sima asked why he was not resting. Zhou Ilhyun replied that he could not, because the more they delayed work and training, the less they would want to do them, so they would finish it quickly. But suddenly he felt a killing presence, and soon they heard several people being killed in the clan courtyard. Of course they had not noticed they were enemies, because the assassins were skilled at hiding. The Blood Demon group had no intention of letting anyone leave alive. Sima drew his sword, asking how those lunatics dared to attack the Zhou clan, but Zhou Ilhyun told him to get out of there, because the killing intent he was sensing was not normal, and he believed the situation would not be easily contained, even if he went personally. The assassins continued the massacre, and the Zhou warriors stood no chance. The Blood Demon assassins ordered everyone to be killed, including the people from the escort agency. Later, Sima was leaving together with the young lady to escape from that place. He told her not to stop, because they needed to leave. She replied that her father was still there. He asked if she had forgotten who her father was. The strongest spear of Henan, the leader of the Zhou clan, unmatched in that region. The assassins truly felt he was a powerful man, but even so, they did not retreat. Sima said she did not understand that her father was holding the assassins back for her and her brother. Zhou replied that he was right, and that they had to do it for their father. Sima said they needed to hide for now and apologized, asking if the Flying Dragon group could come with them. Miryung replied that they would return to the Murim Alliance right away. Pang asked if she was even listening to what she was saying, but she asked if he had not understood the situation, that they needed to report the attack as quickly as possible. The other warrior agreed. agreed. Peng said the assassins would start chasing them at any moment, and that they could not leave Sima alone with the young masters. Sima thought that in fact, if they could not get help, the only thing he could think of was that porter who had wiped out the forest bandits. He said they would look for other means and prayed for their safety. When the Flying Dragon group left, Sima told Seohyun that they also needed to move and that they could head toward the escort mission group that had gone to Sichuan. Seohyun thought that was true, that if they went straight to Dan, they could fight the enemies, and she thought her father had to stay safe until then. After a long time fighting the assassins, the clan leader was still standing, but extremely wounded. He asked who they were and why they were attacking the Zhou clan estate. Then the leader of the assassins appeared in the distance, asking if he wanted to know the reason before dying. At the last moment before his death, Il-hyun asked how he was still alive. Then his head was blown apart by the blood demon, who said he had discarded that name he was about to say. When dawn came, the blood demon looked at the pile of ashes that had been the Zhou clan estate, saying the assassins had handled the job very well. One of them replied that the others were chasing the last members of the Zhou clan bloodline, but asked why annihilate them. The blood demon said that to restore his power he needed to trample that estate. He asked if the assassin knew his relationship with Geisha. The assassin replied that he understood they were rivals who had risked their lives against each other. The blood demon confirmed it, saying that Geisha and he shared a bond that could not be separated and that he was the only one left. But there, in the Zhou clan estate, was one of the 100 masters that Geisha had planned to create to stop him. It was his first step to destroy all of Geisha's plans. That was why he could not let that last root, that last seed planted in this world, survive. Sima noticed that the assassins were already closing in on them. They needed to run just a little more, because then they would reach the escort mission group. But the young master was already falling behind, and soon Jo-in was pierced in the chest by a hook and pulled away by the assassins. One of them rushed towards Sehohyun. The horses collapsed over each other, and Sima wanted to at least protect that girl. Sehohyun wondered if her father had already fallen. They had come this far. At the moment one of the assassins tried to cut her neck, a lightning strike intervened, destroying the sword and the assassin. It was Dan, who had heard the young lady's call and appeared to resolve the situation. Earlier, while returning with the porters and Pio, alongside the escort mission, Dan had heard something, and told Pio he would be right back. Then he simply disappeared. Without a doubt, Dan had clearly heard her voice and her call. That was why he destroyed that sword and killed the assassin. Sima asked him to take care of Seohyun for him, because that was all he needed. The blood demon assassins did not care about that boy, and would kill him as well, just because he stood in their way. But Dan touched Seohyun's forehead, and suddenly she felt all the fear and exhaustion that had built up in her body disappear. He told her to hold back her tears, saying it would all be over soon. Then he turned with an aerial strike, and multiple lightning bolts struck the assassins. They were all electrocuted to death. Seohyun wondered if nearly 20 assassins had turned to ashes in the blink of an eye, and if she had even a fraction of his strength, maybe she would not need anyone else to protect her. Later, she buried her loved ones, saying she would return soon and that they should rest in a better place. Then she asked Dan what she should do now, how she could live alone without her father or her brother. Dan had also been left alone. He had survived that hell by himself and made it out into this world. The first person who had reached out a hand to him was that girl, so he would stay there for her as well. He told her to live with gratitude for those who had gone before, to live doing what was right and what she wanted. She replied that she also wanted to join him on the escort mission, that she wanted to stay by his side. Dan took her arm, said that then they would go together, and told her not to let go. Then he leaped over the trees carrying her, in a movement that for Seohyun was not simply martial arts. It felt like flying through the clouds. As they moved swiftly through the trees, Dan's actions brought her more comfort than any words could express. She thought he was incredible, that her uncle was also considered a great martial artist. Yet even so, the assassins had taken him down. She asked how he was so strong, since their ages were not that different. He replied that spending a long time fighting for survival made a person like that. She asked who he had fought against, and he said he had fought monsters, demons. She asked him to tell her more about it, but just thinking about that hell, Dan did not want to tell anyone anything. If he were to speak about it, he would have to tell how he had climbed back up, stepping over the corpses of the 99 companions who had died, to reach Cheongeja, only for that bastard to already be dead, leaving him without the chance to take revenge. So he said he would tell that story, but not now. Dan brought Seohyun back to Hyunpyo, and she came face to face with the last remaining warrior of the escort agency, and the place where Dan Hyunwoo and Jo Seol-yun ran to without stopping was precisely back to the Renan escort agency group. When they arrived, Hyunpyo was completely confused and asked how the agency and the entire property could have simply vanished. The porters also started to worry, wondering what they were supposed to do from now on. Many began asking themselves if they would now have to search for another place to live and work. Jo Seol-yun apologized for bringing such terrible news right in the middle of the mission, but Hyunpyo replied that it was fine, because she was probably the one suffering the most from all of this. Even so, he noticed that the group's morale, which had already dropped after the previous attack, had now practically disappeared completely after hearing that news. In the situation they were in, they might not even be able to complete the escort mission. But then he tried to encourage everyone. everyone, reminding them that there was still the huge commission promised for the mission. With that money, all of them could start their lives over again, even if only in a simple way. Maybe they could even rebuild the Renin escort agency itself. Hearing that, Jo Seol-yeon realized what he was trying to do. She understood that this was not the time to remain trapped in grief. There were still members of the Jo clan alive there, people she was responsible for, so she decided that she would become strong like Dan Hyun-hoo and avenge her father's death. Soon after, Dan Hyun-hoo asked if they would leave again immediately. Jo Seol-yeon answered yes because the escort mission had to continue. Meanwhile, Il-hyun-jo asked his uncle if that woman really was not the leader of the Jo clan, but his uncle simply told him to ignore it and keep focusing on the mission. Deep down, he was still extremely shocked by the disappearance of that mysterious porter. Even so, he thought that as long as that man kept participating in the escort, it would not matter whether they were transporting a woman or even a tiger alongside the caravan. The group then resumed the journey in a hurry, wanting to finish everything as quickly as possible. During the trip, Jo Seol-yeon became curious about something Dan Hyun-hoo had said earlier. He mentioned that he had been fighting monsters for a very long time, but she had never heard of a place like that. She did not really understand what was happening to him, so she asked if he could explain what he meant before. But instead of answering, Dan Hyun-hoo asked if Chan Gi-jo was really dead. She replied that it was what everyone said, since he supposedly died 10 years ago. Even so, Dan Hyun-hoo kept thinking that maybe he would never get his revenge. Honestly, he did not believe that Chan Gi-jo was truly dead. Then he asked why there was such suspicion, and whether there was any evidence. At that moment, Hyung Pyo explained that there were many strange things surrounding Chan Gi-jo's supposed death. Normally, rumors have a clear origin, but in this case nobody knew where it started. Even so, the entire world believed in his death, simply because he disappeared. It almost seemed as if someone had been spreading that story throughout all of Django on purpose, to convince people that he had truly died. Jo Seol-yeon then asked if he was saying that someone deliberately created the rumor, but why would they do that? Hyun Pyo answered that he still had no concrete proof, but there was a possibility that Chun Gi-ja himself had spread the rumor about his own death. But before Dan Hyun-hoo could finish thinking about that, Pang Chelyong ordered everyone to stop. In the middle of the road was a destroyed carriage. One of the men there apologized for the inconvenience and explained that they probably would not be able to repair it. Then he asked if they could take the young lady along with the caravan to the next village. At that moment, Pang Cheo-young recognized the symbol displayed on the carriage. They belonged to the Woomoon clan. That immediately made him suspicious. After all, after so many attacks during the mission, it was very likely that information about the escorted cargo had already leaked. And now, conveniently, a carriage just happened to break down right in their path. Then the young lady finally appeared. It was Woomoon Hai. Her overwhelming beauty left almost everyone completely mesmerized, except for Dan Hyun-hoo, who simply did not care. When she jumped down from the carriage and approached them, the men were so enchanted that even Pang Chelyong stopped for a few seconds just to admire her. With light movements, almost like a butterfly landing, Woomoon Hai climbed directly onto the cargo wagon and sat there. Immediately, Jo Seol-yeon commented that she should not enter the wagon carrying the goods. Hyung Pyo immediately agreed, saying that it obviously made no sense. But Dan Hyun-hoo remained completely indifferent. Meanwhile, Pang Chelyong eventually gave in and said that since her carriage was destroyed, she could travel with them until the next village. Hearing that, even Hyung Pyo thought the old man had fallen for her charm too. Woomoon Hai politely thanked them, while the porters were practically drooling over her already. Only Hyung Pyo and Dan Hyun-hoo seemed unaffected. Even so, Pang Cheo-young still asked why she insisted on staying in the cargo wagon when she could ride in another, more comfortable one. She calmly replied that she was already receiving enough help and could travel there just fine. Then the caravan resumed its journey. Meanwhile, Woomoon Hai secretly began speaking with her men through voice transmission. She commented that it was fortunate the old man had agreed so easily. Then she started analyzing the entire group. She noticed that there was only one escort warrior and around 30 porters. Aside from Pang Cheo-young, she could not see any true martial master there. That seemed far too strange for an escort transporting 5 wagons filled with thunder bombs. The thunder bombs were incendiary explosives created by the Thunder Sect, weapons capable of destroying entire sects without leaving any traces behind. The sect's influence grew enormously after the creation of those weapons, but ironically, it was precisely because of them that the sect itself was eventually destroyed. After that, the Thunder Sect disappeared for hundreds of years without leaving behind any trace. But now, the method for creating the bombs had returned to the world once again. Woomoon Hai had also learned that the Ghost Pavilion had been wiped out by that group. At first, she thought they had used the thunder bombs, but apparently that was not the case, so she began wondering who had stopped the attack. Because, looking around, there did not seem to be anyone particularly strong there. That was when she noticed something strange. One of the porters was carrying a sword, even though he did not look like someone trained in martial arts. He caught her attention for some reason, but the most absurd part was something else entirely. From the moment she appeared, that man had not looked at her even once. That struck directly at her pride. After all, could there really be a man in the world capable of ignoring her beauty? So she called out to Dan Hyun-hoo. He turned toward her normally, but the instant she met his cold eyes, she involuntarily involuntarily froze. For the first time in her life, a man was looking at her with complete indifference. There was no desire, fascination, or admiration in his gaze. At that moment, Woo-moon-hae decided she would never accept such humiliation. It did not matter who he was. She would make that man kneel before her. Later, when they finally stopped to rest after running all day trying to complete the mission as quickly as possible, Dan Hyunwoo stayed alone near the entrance of the forest. Jo Seol-yeon approached him carrying a meal, but before she could reach him, Woo-moon-hae quickly passed by her. She then approached Dan Hyunwoo, whispered in his ear that she could give him exactly what he wanted if he followed her into the forest, and entered the woods without even looking back. She knew he carried a sword and assumed he had an interest in martial arts. Because of that, she intended to lure him using the special techniques of the Woo-moon clan. Deep down, she even wondered if he would be capable of keeping up with her. But suddenly, Dan Hyunwoo appeared right in front of her. He had arrived first. Startled, Woo-moon-hae let out an involuntary scream, causing her men to immediately rush toward the center of the forest. Unable to understand what had happened, she asked how a mere porter had managed to arrive before her. Then she demanded to know who he really was. He calmly replied that he was Dan Hyunwoo, but he made it clear that it did not matter. What he wanted to know was where Chungija was. Then he told her to give him the information quickly because his meat soup was getting cold. But Woo-moon-hae answered that she did not know where Chungija was. So Dan Hyunwoo simply replied that in that case he would leave, because she did not have what he wanted. Woo-moon-hae then said she still had a few questions to ask, but at that moment, her men quickly approached, furious after seeing the situation. They demanded to know what that mere porter had done to Miss Woo-moon, and were already prepared to draw their swords. But before anyone could even react, Dan Hyunwoo simply disappeared from right in front of them. At that moment, Woo-moon-hae realized that it was not just an ordinary movement technique. He had literally vanished. Shortly afterward, a powerful gust of wind passed near Jo Seol-yeon, and the bowl of soup she was carrying disappeared from her hands. In reality, it was Dan Hyunwoo who had taken it. He appeared calmly while already tasting the soup and commented that thankfully it had not gone cold. Jo Seol-yeon was completely surprised and asked if he had been together with Woo-moon-hae. Then she commented that the young lady was truly very beautiful. Dan Hyunwoo calmly replied that yes, she was beautiful. He even said she could probably win over any man she wanted. Then Jo Seol-yeon asked if he also thought she was beautiful. He answered yes. He said she was just as beautiful as Jo Seol-yeon herself. But immediately afterward, he added that he did not like beautiful women. According to him, the temptation brought by a beautiful woman always ended up leading to death. Meanwhile, back in the forest, one of Woo-moon-hae's guards commented that he was now certain Dan Hyunwoo was the one who destroyed the terrifying ghost hall. Even so, Woo-moon-hae replied that she still needed to observe him longer. After all, aside from his name, she still knew absolutely nothing about him. The following morning, before they even realized it, the Renan escort mission was already nearing its destination, Sichuan. During the trip, Jo Seol-yeon could not stop thinking about what Dan Hyunwoo had said the previous night. She began wondering what kind of life he had lived to believe that the temptation of a beautiful woman inevitably led to death. That was when Hyung-pyo appeared and warned everyone to stay alert from that point onward. According to him, the closer they got to their destination, the stranger the atmosphere became. And the worst part was that his sense for danger was almost never wrong. Both Pang Cheoliang and Il-hyun-jo were feeling the same thing. While analyzing the situation, Pang Cheoliang thought they would probably arrive the next day, and if there was still any remaining threat, then it could only be the Black Viper sect. The sect had grown enormously over the last 10 years and had become the only force in Sichuan capable of threatening the Tang clan. Because of that, Pang Cheoliang began suspecting that information about the mission might have leaked from inside the Tang clan itself. Shortly afterward, Jo Seol-yeon warned Dan Hyunwoo that there might be an ambush along the way, but he calmly replied that yes, he already knew, and he even gave the exact number, around 100 people. At that very moment, Woo-moon-hae was shocked. She began wondering if he could truly sense people's presence and even identify exactly how many were hiding. It was becoming far too absurd, and indeed, only a few seconds later, dozens of warriors emerged from all directions, surrounding the escort caravan. Dan Hyunwoo immediately realized that only 50 of them had appeared first, but before he could act, Pang Cheol-yeong told him to keep protecting the cargo. Then he declared that those Black Viper sect trash would die by his sword. Right afterward, the old man charged forward and unleashed a true storm of poisoned needles against the enemies. While watching the battle, Hyung-pyo asked Dan Hyunwoo whether he thought they would really be alright, but he simply told him not to worry. He only said that the old man would win, and he truly did. The Tang clan took responsibility for dealing directly with the Black Viper sect warriors. Even though the sect had grown greatly over the last 10 years, numbers meant nothing before true experts, especially in front of Il-hyun-jo and Pang Cheol-yeong. Even so, several hidden observers could not hide their discomfort while watching the scene. Woo-moon-hae realized they had completely underestimated the Tang clan of Sichuan. After all, they were eliminating 50 men with extreme ease. One of her guards even commented that even if another 50 Black Viper warriors appeared, they still would not stand a chance. So Woo-moon-hae decided that the best option was to retreat retreat for now. The problem was that she did not know how to give the withdrawal order without drawing attention. But at that moment, Dan Hyeon-hoo calmly said that if she wanted to leave, he would not stop her. Immediately, one of the guards realized something terrifying. He had heard their entire voice transmission. Then Dan Hyeon-hoo coldly warned them that if they did not retreat now, he would kill everyone there. Woo Moon-hae immediately realized he was not bluffing, so she ordered Jongchil to transmit the retreat message at once. Afterward, she commented to Dan Hyeon-hoo that thanks to him, the warriors of her clan would not need to waste their lives in that place. But the reason Dan Hyeon-hoo allowed them to escape was not because of the ambush. In truth, something else was bothering him. A monstrous killing intent that had been scraping against his nerves since earlier. Meanwhile, Pang Cheoliang was effortlessly crushing the Black Viper sect warriors. But hidden within the shadows, an assassin was watching everything. He realized the vanguard had been completely annihilated. But that was part of the plan. The 50 men sent earlier were merely bait. The moment the Tang clan warriors relaxed because of their victory, they would be attacked by the true main force, the Crimson Moon Troop. Everything was proceeding exactly as planned. Since Dan Hyeon-hoo pretended not to notice the retreat, the other 50 men managed to escape alive. Even so, he continued sensing that disgusting killing intent surrounding the area. That night, the group set up camp once again. During the preparations, Hung Pyo asked whether Miss Jo Se-leon could sleep together with Miss Woo Moon-hae, since her tent would be set up beside the carriage. But Jo Se-leon replied that it was fine for her to sleep together with the others. Then she began saying that she had never truly valued the escort agency before. In the past, everything had always seemed calm and peaceful, so she believed transporting goods was simple work. But after participating in that mission, she had finally understood the truth. The escort warriors and the porters were always risking their lives to protect others. That was why she decided that, as a member of the Renin escort agency, she would sleep alongside all of them. And on top of that, she made another important decision. She would become a true escort leader, and not simply because she was the young lady of the clan. At that moment, Dan Hyeon-hoo appeared and said that work inside an escort agency actually began as a porter. Hyung Pyo replied that technically he was not wrong. Then Jo Se-leon asked them to teach her how to become an elite porter. Hearing that, Hyung Pyo felt extremely proud of young lady Jo's growth. Meanwhile, it was explained that the Crimson Moon Troop was a group of assassins carefully created by the Black Viper sect. Because of their peculiar techniques, they specialized in ambushes, stealth assassinations, and completely hiding their presence. At that moment, Dan Hyeon-hoo was walking alone through the forest, searching precisely for that killing intent he continued to sense. Hidden within the shadows, one of the assassins ordered all members of the Crimson Moon to prepare themselves, because the time for the ambush had arrived. But at that exact instant, Dan Hyeon-hoo finally found them. Then he coldly stated that he knew they were hiding there. While the escort group slept without realizing anything, the assassins prepared to attack. But before they could make a move, Dan Hyeon-hoo charged forward. It was so fast that it looked like teleportation. In complete silence, he appeared in front of one of the assassins and took him down instantly. Right after that, another one died without even having the chance to react. Two of them were already gone without making a single sound. Then the captain of the assassins finally gave the order to attack, telling everyone to charge forward and leave no one alive. He himself rushed straight toward Pang Cheoliang, saying that the old man had worked hard to bring the thunder bombs all the way there. But in the end, the Black Viper sect would be the one taking them. But at the very last second, his attack was blocked by a cracked blade. Dan Hyeon-hoo's sword. The leader of the assassins became furious and demanded to know what the Crimson Moon members were doing, because there was still a sentry alive. The other scouts were also shocked, because they had not sensed the slightest presence until that moment. Then the leader finally realized something terrifying. Dan Hyeon-hoo had been listening to all of their voice transmissions. Then Dan Hyeon-hoo calmly asked if Crimson Moon was really the name of the group. Crimson Moon. Dan Hyeon-hoo explained that the Crimson Moon Troop had already been wiped out and that he was the sole survivor. The assassin leader was horrified and asked where a monster like him had come from, but Dan Hyeon-hoo simply replied that he could keep the others company in death. Then, in a single lightning-fast motion, he cut off the leader's head without giving him any chance to react. When Ilyeon-jo woke up, he told his uncle that the entire forest was filled with the bodies of assassins. Jo Se-leon asked what had happened, and Hyung Pyo explained that they had suffered a surprise attack. Even so, all the porters were alive, and only the enemies had died. All because Dan Hyeon-hoo had appeared in time to protect the group once again. Woo Moon-hee realized once again that he had saved everyone, but she could not understand that man at all. Before, she had thought he was merciful, but now she was no longer so sure. To her, Dan Hyeon-hoo was someone impossible to read. With his help, the escort group managed to escape the crisis, and since there was no one left to threaten them on the road, they continued their journey until finally arriving in Sichuan province. As soon as they delivered the cargo, the first thing the porters did was go out drinking and relax after everything they had been through. At that moment, Il-hyun-jo felt slightly bothered by Woo Moon-hee's presence and asked if she had not said she needed to stop somewhere else before Chengdu, since they were practically there already. But she told him not to worry, because when the time came, she would leave on her own. Meanwhile, Hyung Pyo warned Dan Hyunwoo that once they arrived at the Tang clan, they would probably become very busy. Not understanding, Dan Hyunwoo asked why. Hyungpyo then reminded him that he was not very good at jokes, and explained that the Ak clan was located near the Sichuan Tang clan. Since he had mentioned a friend from there, he would probably want to visit them. Hearing that, Dan Hyunwoo immediately remembered Seiji Ak, the friend who had asked him to find his family someday, so he confirmed that they needed to go to the Ak clan immediately. After finally delivering all the cargo, the Tang clan warmly welcomed everyone. Pang Chao-yong handed over the escort payment and even added extra compensation for everything they had suffered during the mission. He also said that he would be counting on Jo Seo-young from then on, and commented that perhaps he should start calling her leader now. For Jo Seol-yeon, that moment carried enormous meaning. She had lost her clan, her property, and everything she owned, but now she was receiving her very first official payment as the leader of the Renan escort agency. It felt as though she was finally rebuilding her life. Then Hung Pyo told her not to worry so much, because things would get better from then on. Jo Seol-yeon agreed and sincerely thanked everyone who had stayed by her side. Meanwhile, Woo Min-hae, who had accompanied the group all the way to the Tang clan, ordered her men to forget about the thunder bombs. She knew that now that the weapons were being produced again, it would be impossible to hide that fact from the main clan. According to her, there had never been anything the Woo Min clan desired and failed to obtain. No matter what it was, they always got their hands on it. But at that moment, what she desired most was not the bombs, but Dan Hyun-woo himself. After arriving at the Tang clan, it was not only the Woo Min clan that showed interest in Dan Hyun-woo. Everyone whose lives he had saved multiple times began to see the young martial artist differently, but Dan Hyun-woo himself had only a single objective in mind. Woo Min-hwang personally offered the group a place to rest within the Tang clan for a while, but Dan Hyun-woo quickly accepted and then leapt away with a gigantic jump. From the top of one of the tallest buildings, he began searching for an energy flow similar to Seiji Ak's. After some time, he sensed a distant presence. Maybe it was only a tiny thread of hope, but it was all he had, so he decided to follow it. Later, Jo Seo-yeon asked where they were going, but Hyung-pyo replied that he would explain better once they returned, because he himself was still uncertain about many things. Then Dan Hyun-woo simply patted her on the head. However, it was not an ordinary gesture. Along with that gentle touch, he also transferred a bit of his energy into her, as if trying to calm her while silently promising that he would return. When they departed, Hyung-pyo noticed that someone was following the group. Looking more carefully, he realized it was Woo Min-hae, most likely chasing after Dan Hyun-woo once again, so he discreetly slowed down while observing the pursuit. At that moment, Dan Hyun-woo shared part of his energy with him, making his body feel far lighter and drastically increasing his speed. Upon noticing that, Woo Min-hae was stunned and wondered where such absurd speed had suddenly come from, since that warrior had not seemed particularly fast before. During the night on the outskirts of Chengdu, they finally arrived at the headquarters of the Ak clan. Hyung-pyo said they could enter if everything was ready, but he was immediately bothered by the fact that there were no guards protecting the place. Then he knocked on the gate. The man who appeared looked extremely similar to Seiji Ak, Dan Hyun-woo's friend. The guard immediately stated that he did not know who they were, but that the clan was not receiving guests at the moment. Then Hyung-pyo asked if anyone there knew Seiji Ak. The guard's expression completely changed the moment he heard that name, and he demanded to know exactly who was looking for Seiji. Instantly, Hyung-pyo felt an enormous killing intent pouring out of the man, so heavy that he could barely breathe. Then Dan Hyun-woo stepped forward and released his own energy, completely crushing the guard's pressure. That made the man furious, causing him to draw his sword and nearly attack at once. However, Hyun-pyo tried to calm the situation, explaining that this had to be some kind of misunderstanding and that Dan Hyun-woo was Seiji Ak's friend. Unable to believe it, the man asked how that was even possible. Then Dan Hyun-woo introduced himself. Sensing the tension, Hyung-pyo also apologized for his behavior, explaining that he had spent a very long time isolated in the mountains and did not understand much about etiquette. The man then introduced himself as Woong Ak and revealed that Seiji Ak was his nephew, who had disappeared 10 years ago. Right after that, he asked whether Dan Hyun-woo had ever met Seiji and demanded to know where he was. Hearing that, Dan Hyun-woo began connecting the pieces together. According to the rumors, Chun Gi-ja had died 10 years ago, and Seiji Ak had disappeared during that same period. To him, that hell where they had been trapped felt like it had lasted 100 years, but in the real world, only 10 years had passed. Then Woong Ak demanded an answer once more, and at that moment, Dan Hyun-woo revealed the truth. He said that Seiji Ak was dead. The news made Woong Ak completely lose control. Furious, he drew his sword and struck directly at Dan Hyun-woo. Even so, Dan Hyun-woo did not even attempt to dodge. Seeing that, Woo Min-hae became furious and rushed forward to help him, but he immediately stopped her, saying that he did not need her interference. Then everyone realized that Woong Ak's sword had not even managed to touch Dan Hyun-woo's body. A powerful layer of energy surrounded his entire body, completely blocking the attack. Woong Ak himself realized that and began to hesitate. Even though Dan Hyun-woo was clearly so powerful, he was not retaliating. Maybe he truly had been Seiji's friend. At that moment, an older man appeared, asking what was going on, and once again complaining about Woong Ak's explosive temper. her. Then he asked why he was attacking the guests. That man was Biwan Ak, the leader of the Ak clan, and also Seiji Ak's father. Woong Ak immediately apologized, while Dan Hyun-woo silently stared at the man who was his friend's father. Then he repeated the news once again. Seiji Ak was dead. Even though he was shaken, Biwan Ak replied that deep down, he had already expected that. Then he apologized for making the guests wait so long and invited them into the clan. Meanwhile, Jo Seol-yeon was still waiting for Dan Hyun-woo and Hyung Pyo to return, trying to understand exactly what he had done to her when he passed that energy into her before leaving, but her thoughts were interrupted when she heard shouting coming from the tavern. A man was yelling that he had finally found his target, and asking whether he had been hiding there the whole time. In the very next instant, someone was violently thrown into the tavern hall. The agency's porters were completely terrified. They had only sat down to drink and relax after the mission, but suddenly they found themselves in the middle of a bloody fight. Realizing the danger, Jo Seol-yeon ordered everyone to get inside and hide immediately. Neither Hyung Pyo nor Dan Hyun-woo was there, so anything bad could happen. She thought that, at the very least, the attack did not seem to be directed at them. Even so, the situation was absurd. They were committing murders in the middle of a crowded tavern. The ones responsible were two young swordsmen from the Black Viper sect. One of the men who was still resisting asked if they truly believed they could do such a thing, and forced the Thunder sect to back down. According to him, the Tang clan would never let this slide, but one of the Black Viper youths merely mocked them, calling everyone their cowards. Looking more carefully, Jo Seol-yeon realized that this was the same group that had previously tried to rob them. Then one of the Black Viper men explained that the sect leader had given them a chance to surrender, but since they had chosen to remain loyal to the Tang clan, they would all die right there. Then a true massacre began inside the tavern. While the slaughter continued, one of the young men approached Jo Seol-yeon with a disgusting smile, asking what a flower like her was doing in a place like that. The others burst into laughter, commenting that apparently Jung Chil had found yet another young lady to add to his collection. Without showing any fear, Jo Seol-yeon ordered them to move aside. One of the men placed his hand on her shoulder and asked if she did not know what happened when the Black Viper sect desired something. But at that exact moment she reacted. Jo Seol-yeon grabbed his arm, twisted it behind his back with terrifying force, snapped the limb, and slammed the man onto the ground. Seeing that, one of the veterans laughed and commented that every flower had its thorns. Then he asked who exactly she was. She then introduced herself as Jo Se-hulyeon, the eldest daughter of the Jo clan, and the current director of the Renin escort agency. The men behind her looked impressed, and said that it had to be a joke, because how could they possibly fail to recognize such an impressive young lady? The veteran then remarked that they should treat her better, even while maintaining a firm expression. Jo Seol-yeon knew perfectly well that her abilities were nowhere near enough to face all of them alone, so she gathered her key and shot out of the tavern using all the speed she had. She did not want to drag the porters into that conflict. As she ran through the streets without knowing whether she would truly escape alive, the whole situation felt almost infuriating to think about. The agency's only truly powerful warrior had gone away, leaving the young leader alone in the middle of that chaos. Meanwhile, far away from there, the atmosphere was completely different. Inside the Ak clan, everyone was calmly drinking tea while being welcomed by their hosts. During the conversation, Biwan Ak commented that Seiji Ak would have been 20 years old if he were still alive, and he asked whether he and Dan Hyun-woo were the same age. Dan Hyun-woo respectfully answered that they were. At that moment, Hyung Pyo noticed something amusing. If Dan Hyun-woo was 20 years old, then he himself was practically twice the age of that boy. After that, Biwan Ak asked exactly how Seiji had died. The atmosphere instantly turned heavy. Then Dan Hyun-woo explained that Seiji had been his companion and friend. The two of them had made a promise while trapped in that hell. Whoever survived would find the other's family. According to him, Seiji often said that he might not make it out alive, but Dan Hyun-woo would always answer that they would both survive together and visit the families of their fallen comrades side by side. But before the end, Seiji had asked that if he did not survive, Dan Hyo-hong should tell everything to his father and apologize in his place. Then Dan Hyun-woo revealed that Seiji Ak had sacrificed himself so that he could escape alive. Hearing that, Biwan Ak fell silent for a few moments. Then he said that his son had died saving a friend, and that it was an honorable death. He commented that the last memory he had of Seiji was when he was still a small child, and while looking at Dan Hyun-woo he realized that this child must have endured horrors just as terrible. That realization tightened the Ak clan leader's heart. Then Biwan Ak declared that from that day onward, Dan Hyun-woo would also be his son. He could call him father from then on. Everyone imagined that Dan Hyun-woo would never respond to that. The boy always seemed cold and distant. Even Woo Min-hae thought that perhaps he would simply ignore the offer, or even strike someone with his sword before answering. But to everyone's surprise, Dan Hyun-woo calmly replied, "Yes, father." That completely moved Biwan Ak, who began laughing as he said that he truly expected nothing less from Seiji's friend. According to him, such boldness could not be measured with words. Then he declared that after 10 years, it felt as though his son's spirit had finally returned home. Because of that, he ordered drinks to be brought out, saying that this was a day for celebration. With the Ak clan leader's order, the atmosphere became much lighter. During the conversation, Woong Ak ended up telling Hyung Pyo the entire history of the clan. 10 years earlier, before Seiji's disappearance, the Ak clan had been nothing more than a small martial clan without much fame in Sichuan. But after the tragedy, Biwan Ak desperately searched for his son until he practically abandoned everything else. Then, at some point, a martial master appeared and passed down Cheongija's martial arts to him. After that, Biwan Ak completely devoted himself to training in the moon-destroying blade art, using all the pain of losing his son as fuel. That was how he built the Ak clan's current reputation. But Woong Ak also explained that recently a sect had begun swallowing up several martial groups across Sichuan without caring about their size or influence. Eventually, the conflict reached the Ak clan, and now they were preparing for a decisive battle. So he apologized once again, explaining that he had mistaken Dan Hyunwoo and the others for members of the Black Viper sect. After hearing that, both Woo Moon Hai and Hyung Pyo began to suspect that this was probably the same sect that had attacked the escort mission earlier. While everyone was talking, Biwan Ak started getting worried after noticing that Dan Hyunwoo kept drinking alcohol straight from the jar without stopping. The problem was simple: he had never drunk alcohol before. But then, even from far away, Dan Hyunwoo heard some voices. It was the people chasing Jo Seolyeon. Immediately, he stood up and told his new father that he would be back soon. Before anyone could react, he disappeared using his movement art. Meanwhile, the Black Viper members had finally caught up to Jo Seolyeon. They completely surrounded her and started mocking her, asking if that movement technique was all she had to show as the leader of an escort agency. Then one of the men rushed forward to attack her, but the moment his palm was about to hit Jo Seolyeon, a powerful energy burst out and instantly repelled the attack. He shouted, asking what the hell that was. At that moment, Jo Seolyeon finally realized what Dan Hyunwoo had done when he placed his palm on her head. He had left a protective energy inside her body. Only then did those Black Viper bastards decide to stop holding back and draw their swords. Jo Seolyeon was unarmed now, and she also knew she couldn't defeat all of them with martial arts alone. Even so, she decided that if she was going to die there, at least it wouldn't be in a cowardly way. But before she could do anything, Dan Hyunwoo appeared right on time. He grabbed the sword of the first man who tried to attack Jo Seolyeon and crushed the blade into countless tiny fragments. Right after that, an electric discharge surged through the man's body, knocking him down instantly. Dan Hyunwoo asked her what she was trying to do. Did she really intend to fight all of them like that? Jo Seolyeon realized that she truly hadn't been thinking clearly. The strangest part was that the moment she thought about him, he had simply appeared. Dan Hyunwoo asked if she had been about to die. Was that it? Meanwhile, several Black Viper members started whispering among themselves, saying they thought they would finally be able to catch that girl after the protective energy disappeared. Then they looked at Dan Hyunwoo and asked if he was the bastard responsible for all of that. Dan Hyunwoo immediately understood the situation, but before anything else, he told Jo Seolyeon never to do something like that again. He told her never to give herself up so easily like that. She answered that she understood, but the Black Viper men started provoking him, asking if he wasn't afraid of the organization. At that instant, Jo Seolyeon saw something she had never seen before on Dan Hyunwoo's face: pure fury. He then reversed his sword and slashed the ground, but not toward the enemies. The strike raised several gigantic stone spikes that pierced through the bodies of the cowardly Black Viper members. Jo Seolyeon was completely terrified, unable to understand what the hell was happening. The entire ground was vibrating and seemed to be chasing the enemies. Then an enormous earth dragon emerged, devouring the Black Viper veteran. Dan Hyunwoo explained to Jo Seolyeon that this was the second form of the three energies sword art, the earth dragon. After that, he told her to leave the rest to him because he still hadn't finished eating. In the end, after all that chaos, the feast filled with drinks finally happened. The atmosphere inside the Ak clan was light and peaceful, but there was one person who couldn't relax in that situation. Yunbaek, who was extremely meticulous and calculating, was also responsible for managing the affairs of the Ak clan estate. The problem was that Dan Hyunwoo had disappeared in the middle of the celebration, and that made him worried. He knew very well that the Black Viper could attack at any moment, and he still had no idea how strong that boy truly was. Biwan Ak said he understood his concern, but asked who told him to worry so much. However, Yunbaek replied that the Black Viper was the most cowardly and vicious group in existence. He had even begun suspecting that those people might have infiltrated the clan from the very beginning, simply waiting for the perfect opportunity to gain the clan leader's trust. And now would be the perfect moment for a surprise attack. And indeed, the White Moon Corps of the Black Viper was already advancing toward the Ak clan estate. But Dan Hyunwoo appeared once again and said that those bastards would never even make it there. Right after that, the leader of the White Moon Corps was struck by lightning. Dan Hyunwoo declared that he would not allow anyone to ruin his father's mood. As he charged toward the enemies, Jo Seolyeon watched the entire scene and thought to herself that he truly had a father now. Dan Hyunwoo fought like a living storm. One of the mansion guards witnessed the entire battle up close and swore that he looked like a demon in combat. The guard then ran desperately to inform the clan that the Black Viper headquarters forces were invading the estate. Woong-ak and Yunbaek immediately replied that they had already expected that. Meanwhile, Biwanak ordered someone to bring him his sword at once. He even began purifying the alcohol from his body so he could fight properly, but the guard interrupted him, saying there was no need. According to him, the invaders really had arrived, but someone had already wiped them all out. A demon. The guard said it was a true demon that massacred every single Black Viper member. Meanwhile, Dan Hyunwoo was already silently teleporting back to his seat at the feast. Nobody noticed anything. Biwan-ak then asked the guard if he was drunk. What did he mean by a demon? But the guard insisted it was true. He had seen something that looked like a demon exterminating everyone. When the guard pointed toward the person responsible, Biwan-ak became irritated and asked if he was calling him a demon. Desperate, the guard replied that he wasn't, then pointed behind him instead. That was when Dan Hyunwoo calmly appeared and said, "I'm back, father." Meanwhile, at the scene of the Black Viper massacre, a man questioned whether that squad had really been sent to deal with the Great Heaven Gate. If so, then why was everyone dead there? Danwall replied that the men had been seen chasing a girl at a tavern in Chengdu. After hearing that, the leader ordered everyone to find that girl immediately. However, another man interrupted, saying that before anything else, the sect leader believed they should first be informed that both the White Moon Corps and the Black Moon Corps had also been completely annihilated. Upon hearing that, the leader flew into a rage and ordered them to recover the remains of the Blue Moon Squad. For now, everyone would return to base. But before that, he wanted all the Heavenly Thunders gathered together, because now they were going to erase the Ak clan from existence. The people from the Renane Escort Agency ended up spending the night at the Ak clan estate. Early the next morning, everyone began preparing to leave. Meanwhile, Woo Moon-hai realized that Dan Hyunwoo and Jo Se-leon had not left her mind all night. She could not understand why he paid attention to that girl while practically ignoring her. At that moment, Woong-ak cleared his throat and asked Miss Woo Moon-hai why his nephew's partner was making such a face so early in the morning. Woo Moon-hai looked confused and asked what he was talking about. Then Woong-ak asked whether she was not Dan Hyunwoo's fiancé. Woo Moon-hai replied by asking if that young lady really looked interested in her in that way. Woong-ak then commented that, honestly, the two of them seemed more like siblings judging by the way they treated each other. She responded that, in that case, she would forget what happened the previous night. But Woong-ak said he still had one more thing to discuss with Dan Hyunwoo before their departure. He explained that the Patriarch wanted to speak with him, but that he would probably be found at the training grounds, since he never skipped his daily practice. And indeed, Ak Biwan was there training while thinking about what he had heard the night before. Biwan-ak directly asked whether it was true that he had single-handedly wiped out an entire Black Viper unit. He also wanted to know which martial art he had mastered. Even though he did not wish to disrespect the Patriarch, Dan decided to answer. He explained that the technique used was the Three Energies sword art, and that Dan Hyunwoo had learned it directly from Cheon-gija. Biwan-ak was surprised and asked whether Cheon-gija was his master. Dan Hyunwoo replied that he was not only his master, but also Seiji's. He explained that the master had only taught them the basics for 3 years, because the rest of the martial arts had been completed by the two of them themselves. After hearing that, Woo Moon-hai finally understood why he was so strong. Dan Hyunwoo then clarified that Chen-gija was not truly their master. In reality, he was the enemy responsible for imprisoning the two of them in that hell. Hearing that, Biwan-ak fell silent for a moment. In his mind, Chen-gija was both the man who kidnapped his son and led him to death, and also the benefactor who ended up teaching valuable martial arts to the clan. Biwan-ak then commented that perhaps Cheon-gija had passed down those arts as a form of compensation. Even so, he knew very well that nothing in the world could ever compensate for the death of his own son. As he thought about that, he split a wooden training dummy in half, trying to understand what he should do from that point onward. Biwan-ak realized that Dan Hyunwoo was there to say goodbye, and said that if that was what he wanted to do, then it was fine. Then he commented that it was probably because of the young lady, wasn't it? Biwan-ak looked at him and thought that the last friend of his son was standing right before his eyes. Because of that, he now considered him like a son as well. So he warned Dan Hyunwoo that Jangu was not a place where everything could be solved with strength alone. From that point onward, he would need to be careful. After that, he asked Jo Se-leon to take care of his son. As soon as they returned to the group, the agency porters rushed toward Jo Se-leon in concern, asking where she had gone and whether she was alright. She apologized for making everyone worry, but assured them that everything was fine. Then she informed them that everyone should prepare themselves, because they would be returning to Henan. Once they arrived there, they would rebuild the escort agency. Biwan-ak said that she could count on the support of the Ak clan whenever she needed it. But at that moment, one of the porters came running over and warned them that it was an emergency. The companions of those Black Viper men were approaching the tavern, and this time there were more than 100 of them. Jo Se-leon immediately thought that they were after her. Meanwhile, Dan Hyunwoo asked whether it was the same group from yesterday. Then he calmly said that he would handle it alone. He walked toward the balcony, thinking that the situation was perfect for him. Meanwhile, Danwol, the leader of the Black Viper gang, ordered his men to advance. He commanded them to capture the girl and kill everyone inside the tavern. However, one of his subordinates told him to look up because it seemed that one of the escort agency porters was standing on the balcony. Soon after, everyone realized that Dan Hyun-woo had jumped down from above. The men began laughing, thinking he was a complete idiot. Even Danwall watched the scene with an arrogant smile on his face. But that smile vanished the instant thunderbolts started crashing down onto the Black Viper men, crushing and annihilating all of them. Danwall became desperate, asking where that power had come from and what kind of monstrous martial art that was. Then Dan Hyun-hoon declared that the Black Viper gang would disappear from the world that very day. And that was exactly what happened. Dan Hyun-woo easily defeated every member of the organization. Later, while the bodies were being collected, the poor agency porters ended up being responsible for gathering all the corpses scattered across the ground. Jo Seol-yeon apologized, saying she did not want to force them to do that kind of work as well. But Hyung Pyo replied that they had gone through things like this a few times already, so it was probably fine. Even so, Jo Seol-yeon was still worried. She asked whether Dan Hyun-woo would really be alright facing the entire Black Viper sect alone. But looking around, there were practically nothing but corpses left. Hyung Pyo then answered that Dan Hyun-woo would definitely come back just fine. Meanwhile, inside the Black Viper sect, the leaders decided to use the 3 true heavenly thunderbolts they possessed in order to overcome the crisis. These explosive bombs had originally been created by the Thunder sect. Compared to ordinary bombs, they possessed far greater power and various uses, but they were extremely difficult to control. In fact, the Thunder sect itself had eventually been destroyed by the flames caused by those very weapons. Even so, the Black Viper leader believed that by using the true heavenly thunderbolts, he would be capable of destroying not only the Ache clan estate, but even the mighty Tang clan. At that moment, a guard came running in and reported that Danwall had returned. However, he was not exactly in one piece. In reality, he was being dragged by an unknown man. Danwall was completely terrified. Then Dan Hyun-woo asked whether that place was truly the Black Viper sect. Danwall answered yes and begged to be released immediately. But Dan Hyun-woo commented that the entrance seemed rather troublesome. Desperate, Danwall explained that the path to the sect passed through a maze of countless connected houses, and only members of the organization knew the correct route. He said that he could guide him there if he wanted, but Dan Hyun-woo replied that there was no need for that. Then he simply kicked Danwall's body around like a ball before launching him flying into the distance. The body smashed through multiple houses, destroying everything along the way and creating a direct route to the sect's gate. Right after that, with a single palm strike, Dan Hyun-woo sent the poor man crashing straight through the massive gates. With the gates destroyed, he finally stood face to face with the sect leader and his guards. The leader was completely shocked. Dan Hyun-woo had smashed through dozens of layers of stone walls, some even reinforced with enchantments, using nothing but brute force. Even so, the leader tried to keep his composure and said that no matter how strong he was, he could never fight everyone alone. But the answer came in the form of lightning. Several electric beams struck the sect guards and annihilated all of them instantly. It was like a violent storm of wind mixed with thunder. Not only did the attack kill the men, it also hurled their bodies away. In the end, only the sect leader remained alive. Dan Hyun-woo then slowly walked toward him and asked if he was the one responsible for all this chaos. With no other way out, the leader activated the true heavenly lightning. The explosion was so monstrous that it blew apart the sect's own ruins. The man began laughing, saying that the power was truly incredible. If he had not controlled the direction of the blast, even he himself could have died. Then he declared that not even a martial god could survive such an attack. But from within the flames, a voice replied, asking if he had finished his last words. Then Dan Hyun-woo emerged from the fire, walking out completely unharmed. At the same time, he summoned the Earth Dragon, which rushed forward and devoured the sect leader with a single bite. And just like that, the Black Viper sect was completely wiped out, thanks to Dan Hyun-woo. The few survivors fled in terror, calling him a demon. They said that man was the gray-robed demon. After the battle, Dan Hyun-woo also took the other 2 heavenly lightning bombs that the sect leader had been carrying. Thanks to his actions, the escort agency now possessed 2 of those absurdly dangerous weapons. Congratulations indeed. After the Black Viper sect was exterminated, reports from the few survivors began to spread. Most of them were merely workers or people who had been present during the massacre. All of them described the same thing: an unknown figure, a demon dressed in gray. The rumor spread throughout Sichuan in the blink of an eye. Naturally, the news eventually reached the Tang clan. During a council meeting, several members were in disbelief. They asked how it was even possible for the Black Viper sect to be wiped out in a single day. It simply made no sense. Then Shilgi Tang, leader of the Sichuan Tang clan, commented that they had spent so long preparing special bombs, specifically to deal with the Black Viper sect. The appearance of someone capable of destroying the entire organization alone meant that a new powerful faction might have emerged in Sichuan, and that could become a new threat. Because of this, he ordered them to investigate investigate everything immediately. However, the messenger replied that there was no faction at all. It was only a single person who had destroyed the entire Black Viper sect. Cholgi Tang asked how something like that could possibly be the work of one person. It was simply too ridiculous to believe. The messenger then answered that the information had been confirmed by one of the survivors. After hearing this, Pang Chelyung commented that the rumor must be true then. He said he knew exactly who that person was, and asked if by any chance the man had been dressed in gray. The messenger confirmed that he was. At that moment, Cholgi Tang asked his uncle if he already had someone in mind, and Pang Chelyung began telling the entire story. After hearing everything, Cholgi Tang said that if it was true, they absolutely could not let a man like that slip away. They needed to bring him to their side. He had to become part of the Tang clan. After all, a dragon and a phoenix had always been the perfect pair since ancient times. But Pang Chelyung found that strange and asked, "Pair?" Later, Dan Hyunwoo simply returned calmly to the members of the escort agency. Meanwhile, there was someone extremely pleased with the destruction of the Black Viper sect. The Blood Demon asked if they had really invested that much into that place, and ordered them to report exactly what had happened. The messenger explained that everything had been the work of that boy raised by Cholgi Tang. The Blood Demon was incredulous, and asked if the entire sect had really been exterminated by a single brat. The man replied that he was telling the truth, and on top of that, they had also discovered where he was staying. He was currently working as a porter at the Renan escort agency. The Blood Demon asked what else they had discovered, and the man explained that they had used 3 true heavenly lightning bombs, but all of them had been taken by the boy. Right afterward, he apologized for the failure. The Blood Demon then ordered them to investigate that monster properly. In his mind, this really did seem like something Cholgi Tang would do. In such a short amount of time, he had created something completely unexpected. But the time was coming. He swore that he would erase every trace of Cholgi Tang, starting with that little monster he had created. After so many twists and turns, the Renan escort agency finally began the journey back home, and in their hands was something absurd, a heavenly lightning bomb. Joe Seolian commented that he truly was incredible. After all, he had single-handedly defeated the entire Black Viper sect, and even brought that thing back with him. Dan Hyunwoo, however, casually replied that it looked useful, so he decided to bring it along. He even said that he thought the name was something like Heavenly Lightning. When he heard that, Hyung Pyo nearly lost his mind and asked if he was talking about the legendary Heavenly Lightning Bomb, the weapon that had destroyed the entire Thunder sect. Yet Dan Hyunwoo continued treating it like it was just some ordinary object. Meanwhile, Jo Seolian casually started playing around with the bomb, leaving Hyung Pyo completely horrified. He begged her to stop immediately, and said that he could store it safely instead. Since he was the only one there who truly understood the value of that explosive, he ended up taking responsibility for keeping it secure. After all, it could become a major trump card in rebuilding the Renan escort agency in the future. But then that troublesome woman appeared once again, Woo Moon Hai. She asked if everyone was returning to Renan, and commented on what a coincidence it was, because she had also been thinking about going there. Then she asked if she could travel together with them. Jo Seol-yeon joked that at this rate, she would end up officially working for the agency. Hyung Pyo admitted that she clearly was not the type to leave just because someone asked her to, so he said they could tolerate her for a little longer. Woo Moon Hai asked if they were happy to see her again and commented that they would be traveling together once more. Jo Seol-yeon replied that she was looking forward to it, but the atmosphere immediately turned strange. The two women began staring at each other with an extremely obvious female rivalry. Meanwhile, Hyung Pyo simply watched everything and thought that the real person responsible for all this chaos, Dan Hyun-woo, was pretending like nothing was happening. Honestly, it was already easy to imagine the mess this journey would still cause. But before they departed, someone appeared calling out to them. It was Hong Wan Tong, an elder of the Tang clan. Hyung Pyo immediately bowed respectfully and asked what had brought him there. The elder calmly replied that he only had a small favor to ask. He said he also had business in Hainan and asked if he could accompany them on the journey. Without hesitation, Hyung Pyo agreed immediately. He even commented that he had been worried about the trip because of his weakened physical condition, so this ended up being a huge help. Then Hong Wan Tang revealed that he also needed to introduce someone who would be traveling with them. Meanwhile, back at the Tang Patriarch's pavilion, they commented that this was probably the perfect opportunity. After all, they had already given her the chance, and now she needed to make use of it. And so Moon Tang appeared, daughter of Cholgi Tang and heir of the Tang clan. Of course, with yet another beautiful young woman joining the group, the female rivalry became even worse. Only after that did the journey to Renan truly begin. During the trip, Jo Seolian began feeling deeply uneasy, even ignoring the fact that Chensang Tang had suddenly appeared to accompany them. The real problem was something else. Her attention was focused on Moon Tang, a woman famous for both her beauty and martial arts skills, known as one of the three phoenixes. And besides her, there was still Woo Moon Hai, leader of the Woo Moon clan, whose beauty seemed to surpass even Moon Tang's, not to mention her terrifying assassination arts. So Jo Seolian began wondering why women of that level were traveling with them. There was only one possible answer. Both of them were looking at the same man, poor Dan Hyunwoo. Even so, Moon Tang thought that he did not seem all that special, so she decided to approach him to confirm it personally and suggested that maybe they should introduce themselves properly. But Dan Hyenhu simply ignored the girl completely. Unable to believe that reaction, Munyoung Tang asked if he truly intended to ignore her. At that moment, Woo Mun-hae commented that she was still a beginner when it came to dealing with him. After all, his indifferent reaction never changed. Then Jo Seol-yeon tried to ease the tension by explaining that Dan Hyenhu was not used to etiquette and formalities. Because of that, he simply asked directly what she wanted. Already irritated, Munyoung Tang commented that he did not even know how to answer properly. That was when Hongwon Tang finally revealed the reason they had come to them. What they wanted were the Thousand Thunders. At the same moment, Munyoung Tang was shocked. Jo Se-yeon realized she should have guessed it from the start. Even Woo Mun-hae was surprised by his boldness. After all, in the Murim, martial arts techniques were never taught outside the relationship between master and disciple. Asking to learn a secret art was already considered a huge taboo, and it became even more absurd coming from an elder of the Sichuan Tang clan. Even so, Cheonsong Tang brushed that aside and asked what the Renan escort agency's future plans were. Jo Seol-yeon replied that she intended to rebuild the agency. Hearing this, the elder praised her determination and declared that from then on, whenever the Tang clan passed through Henan, they would use the services of the Renan escort agency. Upon hearing that, Jo Seol-yeon immediately realized how huge that opportunity was. It was an offer that was almost absurdly advantageous. Then Hongwon Tang explained the only condition of the agreement. 1 or 2 members of the Tang clan would accompany all escort missions of the agency. Even Hyung Pyo fell into thought after hearing that. But before any deeper discussion could take place, Dan Hyun-hoo casually replied that it sounded fine and that he accepted. After all, traditional Murim rules had never meant much to him. Hearing his answer, Hyung Pyo was even startled, wondering if Dan Hyun-hoo had just smiled. In reality, the Thousand Thunders were a completely different martial art from the Heavenly Lightning used by Dan Hyun-hoo. If Heavenly Lightning was like a single bolt descending from the heavens, the Tang clan's Thousand Thunders functioned like an endless storm of hidden weapons falling like lightning, hundreds, even thousands at once. However, it existed only as a secret manual, treated almost like a legend within the Tang clan itself. No one had ever found any concrete clue about that technique. But amid the entire situation, Hongwon Tang finally found a key to reaching it. Dan Hyun-hoo himself was the key he had been searching for. During the journey, the elder instructed Munyoung Tang to keep an eye on him at all times. He was certain that the answer to unlocking the Tang clan's hidden technique lay within that boy. Later, Hyung Pyo announced they would set up camp there for the night. And at that moment, Hongwon Tang's plan began. The elder approached Dan Hyun-hoo and asked if they could have a duel. Without hesitation, Dan Hyun-hoo replied that he intended to win, but Hongwon Tang explained that he already knew that. What he wanted was not a duel to decide who was stronger. Meanwhile, Hyung Pyo tried to quietly warn him that he could not kill a Tang clan elder, but Dan Hyun-hoo calmly replied that he already knew that. After all, he had gone through similar situations before. Hearing that, Hyung Pyo recalled Dan Hyun-hoo's last duel and thought that in fact it hadn't ended very well. The challenger had practically been destroyed back then. So the two moved to a more open area while everyone watched closely. Hongwon Tang commented that it was a good place and immediately activated his poisonous art. Dan Hyun-hoo drew his sword. At that moment, Munyoung Tang focused entirely on the fight. She was certain this would be the key to uncovering the secret of the Tang clan's technique. But the duel ended in literally 1 second. Dan Hyo-hee simply struck with lightning, and the old man fell to the ground instantly. Munyoung Tang rushed over worriedly to her grand uncle, but Dan Hyun-hoo only commented that he had held back. Yet she was completely speechless. In her mind, that definitely did not look like someone holding back. She began to wonder what kind of monster he really was. That same night, after the camp had been set up and most people were asleep, Hongwon Tang was still unconscious. The old man had truly been beaten badly. Watching this, Munyoung Tang felt frustrated. Everything had happened too fast. She hadn't even managed to properly see the technique. Still, she knew she couldn't allow her grand uncle to enter another duel like that without understanding the secret first. So she made a decision. No matter what, she needed to discover that technique. The Tang clan could face threats at any time. Determined, she went to find Dan Hyun-hoo during the night. But that late-night visit did not go unnoticed. Nearby, Woo Mun-hae pretended to be asleep but heard everything. Not far away, Jo Seol-yeon was doing the exact same thing. Both immediately began to wonder what Munyoung Tang was trying to do in the middle of the night. When she reached him, Munyoung Tang asked the young hero Dan Hyun-hoo to teach her the Thousand Thunders. She said that if he agreed, she would give him anything he wanted in return. But his answer was as simple as possible. He simply said it was fine. From the very beginning, Dan Hyun-hoo had never cared much about rewards or martial arts secrets. To him, those things didn't hold much importance, so he simply replied that if she wanted to learn, he would teach her. Immediately, Woo Mun-hae stood up in anger, saying it made no sense. Even if he didn't understand the rules of the martial world, revealing his supreme technique so casually was completely absurd. But Dan Hyun-hoo calmly responded that if she also wanted to learn, he could teach her without any problem. Then even Jo Seol-yeon asked if she could learn as well, and once again he answered yes. yes. He would teach anyone who wanted to learn the heavenly lightning. Thinking about it, it actually made sense coming from him. After all, Dan Hyunwoo had spent 10 years trapped in a cave fighting monsters just to survive. In that place, there had been 100 companions living together in constant despair. Everyone taught each other techniques because they all had to face the same common enemy. In that hell, hiding knowledge didn't help anyone survive. The next morning, the heavenly lightning training finally began. Dan Hyunwoo announced that he would teach anyone interested, and naturally almost everyone wanted to participate, especially since he guaranteed that even those without internal energy could learn it. So he simply raised his sword above his head and told everyone to pay close attention. Then he made a single diagonal downward slash. After that, he told everyone to repeat the exact same movement. The group was confused. Some even asked if that was really all there was to it. After all, he had literally just swung his sword. But Dan Hyunwoo insisted they try. After everyone repeated the strike, he simply said, "Wrong." Then he asked where exactly they had gone wrong. And so the Renin escort agency's journey continued normally. During each stop, the heavenly lightning training continued in the same way, yet no one could properly replicate the movement. The entire training was literally just a single downward strike. As time passed, many people began to give up, including Moon Young-tang. She even started thinking that maybe Dan Hyunwoo had never intended to teach anything from the beginning. After all, if she had known it would be like this, she would never have traveled so far. However, unlike her, those who had spent time with Dan Hyunwoo knew very well what he was capable of. The porters, Hyungpyo, Woo Min-hye, Hongwan-tang, and especially Jo Seo were certain he wasn't deceiving anyone. Then, at the exact moment, Jo Seo-yeon was about to lower her sword, Dan Hyunwoo grabbed her wrist and said he finally understood what the problem was. Immediately, Woo Min-hye became angry and asked why he was touching her like that. But Dan Hyunwoo simply held Jo Seo-yeon's arm and explained that this was how it should be done. In that instant, she felt something strange. The nerves at her fingertips became extremely sensitive as she held the sword. She could feel the lightning. Then Dan Hyunwoo guided the strike using her hand, and at that moment thunder truly erupted from the sword. Afterward, he asked if she understood now, but Jo Seo-yeon honestly replied that she didn't think she could do it alone. Then Woo Min-hye immediately asked what exactly she had realized and demanded she explain it right away, but Dan Hyunwoo said it would be easier to show directly, and so a whole line of people began wanting to learn it that way. Even Moon Young-tang came running back, saying she wanted to try again, but Dan Hyunwoo refused immediately. He said he didn't teach people who gave up halfway. If someone gave up once, then it ended there. That made Moon Young-tang furious, but before she could protest, Hongwan-tang told her to stop. He said that if he truly managed to uncover the secret of the technique, she would be the first person to know. Even though still frustrated, she eventually accepted. After experiencing the heavenly lightning directly under Dan Hyunwoo's guidance, Hongwan-tang finally found a clue to unravel the secret of the Thousand Thunders. Then he asked whether the young Dan Hyunwoo would accept a duel against him once more. Hearing that, Jo Seo-yeon commented that the elder seemed full of determination. Woo Min-hye, on the other hand, realized that he had probably found exactly what he had been searching for. And to their surprise, Dan Hyunwoo was actually enjoying all of this. So he accepted the second duel without hesitation, because this was no longer his old life. It was no longer the hell where he had to swing his sword desperately just to survive day after day. Now it was a peaceful routine, walking with other people, talking, teaching techniques, traveling without having to fight for his life at every moment. Even those duels, where victory and defeat were decided without real risk of death, felt enjoyable to him. So the second duel began. This time, Hongwan-tang took the initiative. The elder unleashed a true storm of attacks. It was the technique 10,000 flowers amidst the rain. Poisoned and paralyzing needles began firing from all directions. At that moment, Dan Hyunwoo noticed something different. The needles were imbued with energy. Perhaps the old man had truly found the answer. While watching that absurd scene, the porters were completely terrified. An ordinary person would already have been pierced hundreds of times by that storm of needles. But Dan Hyunwoo simply spun his sword at an absurd speed, faster than any fan, deflecting all the needles at once. Hongwan-tang was shocked. He hadn't expected anyone to block so many projectiles in such a way. Then Dan Hyunwoo asked why he was throwing the needles like that, saying there was a much easier way to do it. With a single movement of his sword, he created a powerful airflow and pulled all the needles in, mixing them with thunder, and redirecting everything back toward Hongwan-tang. In that instant, the old man understood exactly what he was seeing. That was the Thousand Thunders technique, and it was the first time in his entire life he had witnessed its complete form. The most shocking part was that the one who completed the technique was neither the old master nor his grandniece. It was Dan Hyunwoo. Unable to hide his shock, Hongwan-tang asked how he had done it and begged him to teach it. Meanwhile, Moon Young-tang began to wonder if this was truly the secret technique her uncle had been searching for all this time. After that, the group continued training for 3 days and 3 nights while advancing on their escort mission. Eventually, they returned to Henan, but when they arrived, the sight before them shattered the last remnants of hope. There was absolutely nothing left of the pavilion. Hyungpyo commented that they would have to rebuild everything from scratch, and asked Jo Seol-yeon if she was really sure she didn't want to return to the Jo clan estate, but she replied that she still couldn't go back there. The estate had been completely destroyed by the blood demon. It was a place filled with memories of her beloved family, and she wasn't ready to face that reality yet. Hyungpyo understood her feelings perfectly. Besides, it also didn't make sense to maintain two separate residences at this point. If they truly wanted to rebuild the Renin escort agency in Henan, they needed to make a decision. So he suggested selling the Jo clan estate land. At that moment, Hongwan-tang said he could buy the land, as he was already planning to open a branch there. He explained that if that happened, Monyeong-tang would be in charge of the place, but he assured them she could visit anytime she wanted, since the place held many important memories for her. Hearing that, Jo Seol-yeon replied that if the Tang clan truly did that, she would be eternally grateful. Hyungpyo then realized the decision was settled. Under the control of the Sichuan Tang clan, the place would be safer, avoid conflict, and bring no loss to anyone. But Hongwan-tang also had another reason for agreeing. Deep down, he wanted to stay close to Dan Hyeonhu until he could fully learn the Thousand Thunders technique. Soon after, Woo Moon-hae also said she would stay. She claimed she hadn't yet learned everything she wanted from Dan Hyeonhu. In exchange, the Woo Moon clan branch would provide all the materials needed to rebuild the agency. She also proudly stated that it was no coincidence her clan controlled 1/3 of the world's trade. Then she asked if he finally saw her differently now. But Dan Hyeonhu simply asked whether that meant she would leave after the construction was finished. Woo Moon-hae replied that the Woo Moon clan never conducted business that resulted in losses. Meanwhile, the porter said they had already rested enough, and it was time to clean everything up. Hyungpyo didn't understand what they were doing, but Jo Seol-yeon explained that everyone had worked hard during the journey. She said they could simply take their payment and go home, returning only when the agency was ready again. However, Jaegil responded that the Henan escort agency was also important to all of them. Because of that, they wanted to continue helping, of course if she allowed it. Hearing that, Jo Seol-yeon said it was more than enough, but still ended up accepting their help. And so, with everyone's determination coming together, the Henan escort agency, once on the verge of disappearing into the darkness of the Murim world, slowly began to rise again. At the center of all this change was the enormous potential of Dan Hyeonhu, but while some were rebuilding, others were being completely destroyed. At that very moment, the Jo-in clan was being annihilated. The clan leader said he had already handed over all the thunder bombs, but the enemy replied that it was a direct order from their leader, to ensure no one else could ever obtain the bombs. The entire Jo-in clan estate had to be erased. The clan's spear wielder tried to resist and charged at them, but he was killed with a single strike. After that, the enemy commander declared that they could return, as the cleanup was complete. But in his final moment, the Jo-in clan leader detonated the bomb he had hidden with him, and just like that, the Jo-in clan estate, successors of the Thunder sect that once dominated the martial world with their bombs, was completely wiped out. Meanwhile, the leader of the Murim alliance, Dok Go-woon, analyzed reports of all these events. He commented that until they discovered who had destroyed the Jo-in clan estate, anyone could assume that even the powerful Jo-in clan had been easily exterminated. Furthermore, the reports also indicated that the culprits were now likely in possession of the thunder bombs. Dok Go-woon knew that with so many tragic news and dark rumors spreading across Janghu, the Murim alliance was already overwhelmed trying to understand what was really happening. He then stated that if those people decided to use the bombs with malicious intent, it could turn into a disaster for all of Janghu. Worst of all, no one knew who they were or why they were causing so much chaos. Meanwhile, the blood demon was congratulating his subordinate for an excellent job. Then the subordinate asked what he intended to do about the porter from the Henan escort agency. In response, the blood demon asked what Ma-yuk had been doing lately. The subordinate replied that, as always, he was probably drunk somewhere in Henan. Then he asked if he should be sent to handle the situation. The blood demon answered yes. If it was Ma-yuk, together with the demonic shadow squad, it would be more than enough to eliminate that boy. Meanwhile, the reconstruction of the new escort agency continued without major problems. However, at one point, Hyungpyo arrived with urgent news for Jo Seol-yeon. They had finally received a new escort request. It was a mission to protect the daughter of a man named Jagal, but the most unusual part was that the one who had personally decided to accompany her was none other than the Sword King. Hearing that, Dan Hyeonhu immediately became interested, and so, his second escort mission began.